Welcome to Saturday night. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I hope it's been wonderful for all of you. It certainly has for me. Now, on to the show. First hour and most of the second hour will be a return guest, one that's been anxiously awaited by everyone. Clif from Half Past Human is here. His website, again, is halfpasthuman.com. We're going to be talking about the latest release and build language from his Alta reports. We're specifically going to be probably using reports 5 and 6. It's going to be one crazy night of conversation with Clif. Let's welcome him to the show. Hey, Clif, how are ya?
Doing just fine, Rebecca.
That's good. I know we talked a little bit before we went on the air, and you're feeling better from the last time you were on. We're very happy about that, by the way.
Well, thank you much.
Yes.
And happy birthday, of course.
Well, thank you. I'm just another year younger. What can I say?
There you go.
Yeah.
And if they're correct and the singularity approaching has those characteristics, it may soon be that way.
We may all go back into infancy. Who knows?
Well, or at least time will seem to slow down for us all.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because in the moment we're in, Clif, it's sped up. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, no question about that. Acceleration is demonstrably palpable.
It is. It's tangible. You can almost see, feel, and touch it. It's absolutely amazing. And the other thing I noticed, too, is that it fluctuates. Like there's, in a day's period of time, you can sit, and it seems like it goes by it's like it's in the past, where it's like normal, slow time, in a sense.
Sure,
and then all of a sudden... your day's gone, and you go, whoa.
What happened there?
Yeah, what did I do? Where did I go? Who did I talk to? I was busy.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting little diversion if we can take a minute here.
Absolutely, yes.
And we discussed something strange, such as Einstein's equation of relativity, which everybody knows is E equals mc squared. And what very few people tend to do is to reduce it down to its energetic component, in which case you would take the equation and you'd bring it down to where you had energy on one side to determine what was the actual makeup of it. You can reduce c squared down to light, speed of light squared, but now we know the speed of light is not constant, and even the general relativity formula acknowledges that. But the curious component of it is that it appears as though it's actually photons that transfer either information or actually explicit experience of time. So when we subjectively say time seems to speed up, we might be actually objectively describing the real effect for us in a local space-time environment, because there's nothing to say that space-time is consistent around the planet, around the solar system, or around the universe.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's kind of a strange little way to think about things, but it's dovetailing with a lot of the other stuff that's coming out. So it may be that if indeed the such a thing as the photon belt exists, and the photon belt is this idea that all of the stars in the galaxy along the ecliptic plane have their light squashed into kind of a flat disk by a magnetic field. And if that exists, and we're going to transfer more light, then we're certainly going to be altering time as the solar system goes through it.
Boy, now that just made my little brain explode with all kinds of
there's interesting
concepts,
possibilities there, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like one thought leads to another. Well, wow, check that out. Wow.
And then we have, of course, the issue for ourselves in this particular sense of this now, in which we all feel pressured by the current daily events. How much of that is, in fact, external? We know there's more events, and we presume it's simply because there's more people. But we may actually be in an area of space where each and every second feels slightly smaller than the second that preceded it. And again, if the people with the singularity are correct, then after we pass through the singularity of around 2012, then we'll get to a period in space where every second feels longer than the second before it.
Well, now, this terminology is not interesting, because these were things that was talked about in Star Trek back in 1982. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Captain Kirk invents the world,
Yeah. You're like, hello. And now we're like living it. It's craziness, isn't it?
But you've got to take the attitude of there is probably no better time to be alive. Would you really rather have been alive and
no.
Have your consciousness now in the Middle Ages?
No.
Never going 20 miles from your home area?
No. No, I can't. I've thought about that, actually, Clif. I really have. Even before you asked the question, I was like, no. I really wouldn't. This has just been, as I've looked back just from when I've been born, right, to now, and I'm thinking all the things, everything that we've come to know and learn and to respond to and to know about and experience. And I'm thinking, wow, if you could actually write a book and somebody that didn't know anything about this time, about everything that has transpired, they wouldn't believe you. It would sound like something out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, the rate of change has been staggering.
Oh, and it's not going to get better as we understand it, right?
Correct. The actual rate itself is increasing.
Right.
And that appears to be a significant contributor to all different kinds of mental states of people in the future.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. Where I'd like to start is because we did have some questions already in the chat box. And for everyone who's out there listening, if we can hold off on some more of those questions until a little bit later, we will get to those questions as time permits. But one of the questions or things that a person in the chat box wanted to talk about, which is the beginning of your Alta report number 5, which talks about the West Atlantic ice sheet.
Yeah.
Because now that's also out in the mainstream news. And I'd like to kind of start with the Alta report number 5 in this particular series of the 1109 series.
Sure.
And I'm going to let you run with that, with the West Antarctic ice sheet and you know, what the language is saying about that, if you don't mind.
Sure, and this is actually referenced in Part 6 as well.
Yes.
Because it's an interesting set of linguistics. A number of years ago, we had a set of linguistics show up for what we labeled the global coastal event, because the nature of the way in which the linguistics piled up in our model space, I just made the assumption it was, something that occurred over a day or a couple of days. And later on, I ended up, and this was probably in like 2004 that this language first started showing up. It started showing up, forecasting that it would materialize sometime in early 2009. And just as predicted, the language has shown up in that we, as you note, we have mainstream press out there talking about the idea of the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet. And this is an interesting ice sheet because it seems to form a cork, if you will. It's floating on water, blocking the separation of a larger ice mass that is sitting on land but is below sea level. So the idea being that if the West Antarctic ice sheet broke off and went floatabout, then the water pressures might be such that it would pop this larger ice mass off of the rock upon which it's sitting, and the water would rush in underneath and raise it straight up, as opposed to having to slide off or go anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's sitting like on a planet-sized dimple, like the little dimples in a golf ball, and the ice is actually pressing down on the rock and has adhered to the rock, but no one knows exactly how strong that adherence is. Now we've got the indication that the rock itself is heating up from volcanic activity. And so the report comes out that if this ice sheet goes, we're going to have very strange, for lack of a better word, coastal water behavior. Now, we had been predicting a global coastal event that was, while vague, had some determining factors that we could see, in that it wasn't a tsunami, it wasn't really tidal action per se, it was something in between the two. And we didn't know if we were talking about, asteroid plunging in and upsetting the balance, or perhaps a giant landmass moving up, or what, but we knew that there was some kind of there was a forecast coming out of the language of some kind of an event that would affect all of the coastal waters. And this may well be the case. But what we were discussing back in 2004 was the appearance of the language about this very real hazard now. And one of the things that the scientists that are reporting on the West Antarctic ice sheet separation as a possibility are noting that if it shifts and moves, all it has to do is pop up off of the rock, and two courses of action will be, two paths will be set into action here. One of which would be the rise in the land underneath it, no longer being pressed down, would cause earthquakes and land alterations planet-wide, especially around the Ring of Fire. And secondly, we would end up having at least some level of likely physical pole shift, simply because of the centrifugal force alteration.
Yeah, that was the thing that got me, was when they were talking about that it would create a pole shift. So,
and there, of course, they've got some math that suggests it would go to like 550 meters up to 15 kilometers or something. And what they're doing is they're basing the math on some presumptions that none of which is valid, or none of which has been validated historically. So in other words, if the pole shift that they were talking about came about, it would be on the order of 0.00025%. Not very far at all. In fact, noticeable because probably there would be a big global earthquake and everything would sway for a while, but not very much movement at all. But in the past, especially in those pole shifts as researched by Hapgood and Hancock and others, the median amount of movement appears to be about 30 degrees. So a much greater level of displacement. So they may be thinking, oh, well, because of the math involved here, we'd get a 550 meter up to 15 kilometer shift. But they probably are under the assumption that there would be something to stop that crustal movement, and that may not be the case. It may be that it has to go centripetally until about 30 degrees before slowing down.
So it has a lot of repercussions that are unknown yet.
Correct, and totally unvalidated, because the historical evidence does not show small polar crustal shifts.
No, it doesn't support what they're saying. That kind of gets into some of the other stuff, though, that came out in the reports, too. Kind of interesting there. And that's interesting that the volcanic activity underneath could also be causing, obviously it's causing a rise in temperature, which would melt the ice from underneath, which would also cause it to be able to free itself.
Correct. Float loose on a little lake.
Yeah. That's all very interesting. And, you know, there's been a lot of weather changes across the world since the last time you were on.
Oh, I know.
It's just been very, very odd.
And it's actually going to be the new norm for a while. We won't be going back to previous patterns if our reports are accurate.
Yeah.
Because they suggest that we're going to get, I don't want to say permanent because they won't stay in the place they're at now, but rather the new weather pattern will be a continual change kind of a thing as opposed to any form of stability for a couple of years.
Yeah. So my question now is, because I want to get back to, because this is also part of the Alta reports, is when you were talking about all of the underground volcanic activity. That's also part of your reports. And that seems to have been something that has set a precedence here, or certainly been quite in the forefront in these reports that has come out. So if you can, from
Sure, I'll back up as well there because we've had a language descriptor for what we've been calling dancing mountains for I think probably 2 or 3 sets of reports, so at least 6-7 months. And those appears to be manifesting now in the form of all of the volcanoes that are starting to pop off, as well as the underlying magmatic movement that appears that was also forecast to be part of it, because we had images of quivering mountains and light from the base of the mountain and all these archetypes that indicated that we were dealing with a very large, or rather more general magma flow than would be normally associated with just a volcano here and there. And this also appears to be part of an overall pattern. Now, initially, we first started noticing the language around this stuff in 2003, and it carried on with some significance through 2005 in our forecasts, and a lot of it then was associated with Antarctica and undersea, because there appears to be 11 or 12,000 volcanoes to where they had initially thought there were 1 or 2. And there indeed does appear to be a land bridge that's going to form if all these volcanoes go off from the bottom of Patagonia, Terra del Fuego, over to the Antarctic landmass.
Interesting.
Which will have its own repercussions on ocean levels, etc.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, it's the domino effect, right? When one thing moves, then everything else has to as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's just the way it is. But is that not what this is all about, is change, right?
Correct.
And we can't say it enough. You know, it's not about doomsday prophecy or anything here. This is about people being aware so they can be understanding of what the changes mean. Because I will tell you, in the last couple of years, I live in Kansas City